guys, so with the release of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, we now have 5 films in the Indiana Jones franchise, and what a franchise this is. I've always loved the Indiana Jones franchise ever since I was younger. I have just adored all of these crazy adventures. Indiana Jones as a character is so iconic, but I've never really had the chance to discuss Indiana Jones on the channel, so I want to take this opportunity, since this more than likely is going to be the final Indiana Jones film with Dial of Destiny, which made it all the more ironic when I rewatched all the films leading up to Dial of Destiny, and I noticed that my steelbook says Indiana Jones: The Complete Adventures. So, with Dial of Destiny, I guess that's a lie now. Of course, this is just my opinion on the Indiana Jones franchise. I would love to know your opinion down below in the comment section. Let's try and keep things civil here, but let's move on to my last place pick. In last place, I have Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. By far, for many years, the most divisive sequel in the franchise. However, I would say Dial of Destiny is probably going to take that crown. But I don't think necessarily Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is awful by any means. There are some things I think they did pretty well. Occasionally, there are fun ideas. Several of the action sequences with Indy do capture that fun adventure vibes that we've come to love from these films, but it also is a weird hodgepodge of a lot of different ideas that I also don't think are executed in the best way. From the weirdly bad usage of VFX that looks so out of place, Spalko, as much as I love Cate Blanchett, I think she's one of the weaker antagonists of the franchise. Alien stuff I am more mixed upon, because we have had a lot of fantastical things in the Indiana Jones universe, but the aliens did kind of take me out a little bit, if I'm being honest. But one of the most egregious offenders of Crystal Skull is Shia LaBeouf as Indy's son. If done properly, I think injecting Indiana Jones's son into the franchise could have been really interesting, but Shia LaBeouf is just not good here. Even when he's trying to do the action sequences, he's swinging from vines like George of the Jungle. It took me out a bit. And as much as I love Indiana Jones as a character, I've always found it odd how indestructible Indiana Jones is in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. We've always seen Indy in these extremely dangerous scenarios, but the plausibility in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I think, is the most ridiculous, even outside of the infamous scene where he survives the nuke by getting into the fridge and getting launched. There are other sequences where he definitely should not have survived in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. There still is definitely some fun to be had rewatching Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I don't think it's awful by any means. However, I don't think it comes anywhere near close to the greatness of the first 3 Spielberg films. In 4th place, I have Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Considering I wasn't a huge fan of Crystal Skull, Spielberg wasn't returning to direct this time around, I was very apprehensive about this upcoming 5th entry, but I slightly had more fun with the all-around adventure in Dial of Destiny than I did with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. While not a perfect film by any means, I do like James Mangold a lot as a director, and I think he did a good enough job crafting an adventure around an older Indiana Jones and how he attempts to come to terms with his age while still being the great Indiana Jones that we know and love. Regardless of the fact that Harrison Ford is now 80 years old, I still think he is fantastic as the character and brings a lot of interesting dynamics to this older Indiana Jones. Even in the action sequences, you know, they kind of have to try their best to make the action sequences work around him being older because, you know, he's 80 years old. You don't really expect a lot of action sequences from 80-year-olds, but they did their best. I think Helena Shaw also is one of the more interesting companions in the franchise. She's not my favorite companion by any means, but Phoebe Waller-Bridge, very interesting character. I think a lot of fans are probably not going to like her character, though, unfortunately. But I think she complements Indy well in searching for the Dial of Destiny. It's also extremely impressive the de-aging for the opening 20-minute train sequence, which I think is one of the most fun action sequences of the entire film and some of the best VFX, because afterwards, it does kind of go downhill from there as far as the story and the VFX work in the 3rd act, I think, is really bad, and some of the chase sequences as well. Some of the ways I feel about this, I also feel towards Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. There are some fun moments to be had with this, but also there are some messy moments as well. So I would say if this is truly the end for the character, it ends on a bit better of a high note compared to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. In 3rd place, I have Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. I really have to commend Steven Spielberg for this entry just because of how radically different this is in comparison to Raiders of the Lost Ark and going for a much darker tone, which as a horror fan, I love. Even though it's darker in tone, I still think it's able to deliver an epic, riveting adventure for Indiana Jones, Short Round, and Willie finding the Temple of Doom. Even on rewatch, I'm astonished by the level of creativity on screen with the action and how the suspense and tension builds, whether it's the opening chase, jumping out of planes onto rafts, these crazy traps, or the minecart sequence, which still blows my mind to this day. When it comes to the character of Short Round, he is a very divisive character. There are a lot of people that think he's extremely annoying. There are some that find him endearing. I'm on the more positive side. I think he's a great compliment to Indiana Jones. He has some great moments, unlike with Willie. Unfortunately, with Willie, I think she is one of the more annoying characters in the franchise. I think she's also just not very well written. Going back to the darker tone of Temple of Doom, we saw some of those elements in the first film back in Raiders of the Lost Ark when they opened the Ark of the Covenant, but they go full on gnarly in Temple of Doom in this, and I think it's great as a horror fan. You got severed fingers on statues, you have people's hearts being ripped out by a crazy cult that uses voodoo and turns Indiana Jones evil briefly. It's a wild film, and it's PG, because they didn't have PG-13 back then. This was one of the things that caused that rating to be created, because there were probably many children like myself watching this and was probably traumatized by seeing all this violence on screen. It might kind of be the oddball of the trilogy, and it is my least favorite of the trilogy, but I still think it is pretty amazing. In second place, I have Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I don't know where to begin with my positives for this film. I love so much about the Last Crusade. The biggest aspect for me, I think, is I love the dynamic between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery, who are one of my favorite father-son dynamics in any film due to how brilliant Sean Connery is. It's always a great time watching Indiana Jones going on these adventures to find artifacts, and this film being the Holy Grail, but Sean Connery just enhances everything about this quest. Out of all 5 films in the Indiana Jones franchise, I've always found this entry to be the funniest Indiana Jones film, with how they bounce off one another and how unimpressed he is with Indiana Jones even though he's doing all this cool stuff. Not only that, but The Last Crusade also manages to pack in a lot of emotion and stakes for Indy as a character, because we are fleshing him out a whole lot more, getting to see his relationship with his father. That goes along with how much I love the opening of the film with a young Indiana Jones portrayed by the late River Phoenix. It's truly a shame that he passed away as young as he did, because he is excellent as a young Indiana Jones. He really does feel like a young Harrison Ford, and if we got to see him portray the character more, I would have been really hyped for that. Like with every film in this trilogy, there are riveting action sequences, and The Last Crusade is no different, consistently having me on edge from phenomenal tank chase to the riveting third act when Indiana Jones is going through these various intense trials. It perfectly encapsulates how amazing these adventures are, and honestly, I think it ends everything perfectly, seeing Indy and everyone riding off into the sunset. Little did we know that we'd be getting 2 more films after this, but still, if you just want to think of this as a trilogy, I think it is a great end to the trilogy of films that Spielberg directed in the 80s. But at number 1, Raiders of the Lost Ark. By far one of my favorite movies of all time. Pretty much everything about this movie, in my opinion, is perfection. Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Lawrence Kasdan crafted a fantastic throwback adventure that's perfectly paced, well written, and a masterclass when it comes to tense, action-packed moments of wonder, witnessing Indiana Jones on this quest to find the Ark of the Covenant. Raiders of the Lost Ark is just one of those films that make you love blockbuster filmmaking, and I think a big part of that is due to the fact that Harrison Ford is just iconic as the character of Indiana Jones. He already struck gold as Han Solo. It's kind of crazy that he has managed to be 2 iconic characters at the exact same time. Right from the very opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark, it isn't hard to see why the character of Indiana Jones became so iconic due to Harrison Ford's charismatic portrayal. He's effortlessly cool, he's doing all this amazing action hero stuff, avoiding traps, taking out bad guys left and right. I mean, the most iconic scene, I think, by far, that always makes me laugh, is when he shoots the swordsman instead of actually engaging in combat with him. But even when we see him do all this cool stuff, there is a vulnerability to Indiana Jones, as we learn very quickly. He also has an extreme fear of snakes. There are just too many iconic sequences to count inside of Raiders of the Lost Ark, but the ones that I think are the best are those iconic sequences of action that still hold up due to Spielberg's fantastic direction and the usage of tension and pulse-pounding score from John Williams. Especially during that insane truck chase that still blows my mind. The action in the trilogy at large is very mind-blowing and still holds up. A large part of that, I feel, is due to the fact that it's real. They didn't have a lot of big CGI green screen. They actually did a lot of this crazy stuff for real. Outside of Indy, the supporting cast in Raiders of the Lost Ark also is great. Sala is awesome. I actually quite like Marion. She has such great chemistry with Indiana Jones. I love their banter as they go on this adventure to try and find the Ark of the Covenant. The adventure itself is riveting and then has such a dark conclusion when they open the Ark of the Covenant and it just melts these people's faces off and makes them explode, which as a child I was not expecting that either. Both this and Temple of Doom were so violent that I could not believe I was getting away with watching it as a child, but they're still awesome after all these years, so I commend them for being crazy in the 80s. But yeah, definitive blockbuster filmmaking here from Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's iconic. But there you have it. That is my ranking of every film in the Indiana Jones franchise. It was so much fun discussing every film in detail with you guys because, like I said, I have never really had the chance to talk about the Indiana Jones franchise, even though it's one of my favorite franchises of all time. As I said earlier, though, make sure you share your rankings down below. How would you rank every film in the Indiana Jones franchise from worst to best? I'm very intrigued on how different everyone's answers are going to be, so share them in the comment section. Let's have a fun discussion down there. As always, thank you guys so much for checking out the rankings. I always do appreciate it. Make sure you like on the video and also subscribe to the channel so you update reviews, reactions, rankings, unboxings, and more. Till next time, I'll see you guys later.